I want to talk a little bit about globalization or the lack thereof. And obviously this idea that the virus is probably going to reverse the trend of globalization. I think that there was this kind of underlying tone of, hey, borders coming down, let's be more global, both on a business and also a social component. Virus happens. Now everyone's basically walking around with masks on, pointing at each other saying, forget another country. Hey, you're from another state. Right, I heard those New Yorkers, they got a ton of virus, or Chicago. Oh no, I don't want you coming from that city. Maybe talk a little bit about how that trend reversal of globalization may occur.
Yeah, another state, the people in the suburbs are telling the people in New York or Chicago to go back to the city at this point. But yeah, as far as globalization goes, the virus came out of China. We could leave for another argument whether or not China did everything that they needed to do and it's been properly reporting. Probably not. And there's a lot of anger around the world. Rick Scott, senator from Florida, was on TV last week and he got very mad and he said, anybody that buys anything made in China is immoral. Well, 60 days ago, you would have been run off as a kook if you would have said that. And, as I like to say, who's going to defend China? There's 22,000 dead Americans. Is anybody in the Democratic Party going to stand up and say, Rick, you've lost your mind? How about Europe? Is Macron from France? He's got 16,000 dead. Is he going to say, no, we have to be nice to the Chinese? No. Are the Italians going to say that? No. This is global. Who's going to say that? Larry Kudlow, over the weekend, Easter Sunday, said, remember, Larry Kudlow, who signed off his show, I believe in free market capitalism is the best path to prosperity, said the United States government should pay the moving costs of all companies that want to move back from China. Okay, two things about that. Where's the free market capitalism, Larry? But more importantly, so now we're ready to do that come the other direction. And I think that there's going to be a lot of that. Everybody's in agreement that at a minimum, strategic stuff like pharmaceuticals should be coming back. Okay, why does it stop there? Why are we going to not turn to Mr. Cook and say, why are you leaving yourself vulnerable by making your phones in China? Why aren't you making your phones here or in Europe or in South America or a little bit of all of them? And Mr. Cook's argument would be because it's more efficient to make them in China. And we would come back to him and say, this is about resiliency now. This is not about efficiency anymore. That era has sailed. We're more about the resilient era. The next time we have to shut down the economy for 3 months, we want nobody to have a bailout. Okay, think about how the balance sheets have to look and how everybody's business has to be. They can be structured for that, but they're not going to give you that forward PE of 20 on 130 earnings to get you back to 3,400 on the S&P. You're not going to have that. So I think that deglobalization is going to push back. And governments are going to do that too. When people start pointing at the Trump administration, you could have done more, or the Johnson administration in the UK, you could have done more. They're going to say, it's China's fault. And everybody's going to say, yeah, I agree with you. It's China's fault. And there's going to be no natural constituency to defend China. So I do think you're going to see some of that deglobalization come down, and it's going to mean less efficiency. I didn't make a qualification on whether that's good or bad. It might be necessary, but it is a reality that the reason we're in China is it's more efficient. And if we leave, we're going to be a little less so.
Yeah. When that happens, what do you think occurs in terms of the China versus U.S. global superpower showdown, right? And what I mean by that is what you're essentially doing is by becoming more resilient, you're becoming less efficient, and therefore, can you actually produce the goods as well? Probably not. Can you produce them as fast? Probably not. As cheaply? Definitely not. And so you get in this weird world where do U.S. consumers exclusively consume then from U.S. companies where everything's made in the U.S. and China is, exclusive Chinese manufacturers that are all made in China? Or do you still get the consumer kind of shopping for lowest price and kind of benefiting from the efficiencies, but companies are the only ones that are affected and they're the ones that are forced to be resilient, and therefore U.S. companies end up actually losing because they lose that efficiency?
Yeah, I think, first of all, that efficiency, that resiliency will come over time. It won't happen immediately. We won't just wholesale pull out of China. we will start to pull out of China over time. I think from the Chinese perspective, they're going to be under enormous pressure because they're going to see their growth rates peak and they're going to start coming down. Keep in mind the following about China. In the United States, there's 9 cities that have a million or more population, and there's 10 cities in Europe that have a million or more population. In China, there's over 30. And we learned a new one called Wuhan that had more people than New York City. Probably before November, nobody knew what Wuhan was as well. There's 1.4 billion people in China. Every year, the population of Canada, about 22 million people in China, migrate from the farms in the rural areas, which are really third world, to the cities, which are really first world in China. They're as modern as any city, and they're looking for a job. And as long as China's growing fast, they can bring those people and they show up sometimes with no shoes on. And they say, here, sit down at this thing and do this like this for, for 14 yuan a day, and you can send it back to your family on the farm, and they're happy to do it. Now they come to the city, and they don't have that growth rate anymore. And they don't have that. And there's going to be resentment and anger, and they pile up in the ghettos in these cities, and they get mad. Why don't I have a job? And they create a lot of social unrest in China. So China is going to be under the gun to try and rectify this. Now, the way that China is going to rectify this, I think, is real simple, is China needs to be more transparent. Let the world in. Let the world see what's going on. The next time 3 people have a cough in China, people from the West can go down and see, is this a pandemic or is this nothing, instead of waiting for you to give me, your spin and hide it. The Chinese government's never, communist government's never going to do that. So they're going to have some change. On the flip side, we're going to have that change too. We're going to have to see us pull back. While we pull back, I think it's going to fall on the companies themselves in order to eat that loss. Their margins are going to have to get squeezed over time. It will only be as the process is unfolding is that you're going to see then them be able to pass those costs along. Because remember, I think what's going to happen is companies are going to be forced to become more resilient. There's going to be rules. There's going to be twisting of arms. You got to get out of China or something like that. And then they're going to get out of China, but then they always won't be the lowest cost producer, but they're going to have to be forced to price to the lowest cost producer. And that's going to make them squeeze their margins as well too. So this will be a process that will take some time. And again, I'm not suggesting that this is catastrophic in any way, but what I am suggesting is if you're waiting for 15% earnings growth and 20 forward PEs to just power the market forever and ever, that era may have ended already. And we're going into a different type of era. It doesn't mean the stock market goes, down 90% like the Great Depression, but we're not going to go back to the old highs for a while, at least one cycle before we can kind of figure it out.